Before we begin, perform that little ritual of success. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and write in the comments what you thought of the message. There comes a moment in every human life when the world grows silent. Not outside, but within. A moment when the noise of habits, beliefs, and borrowed truths fades like a dying echo, and something ancient, something long forgotten, whispers from beneath the ruins of the self. Wake up. Nietzsche once wrote that there are days when the spirit outgrows its old skin, days when the soul no longer fits the shape imposed on it by morality, society, and fear. These are not gentle days. They arrive like storms, quiet at first, but devastating once they touch the inner ground. For the awakening of the soul is not a sunrise. It is an earthquake. You do not rise delicately into a new life, you collapse out of the old one. And everything you thought was stable, your certainties, your convictions, your borrowed identities, begins to crumble. This is the day Nietzsche feared for humanity, yet longed for in every individual. The day when the soul decides that it can no longer endure captivity. For most people, the prison is comfortable. Its walls are made of familiar beliefs, predictable routines, and truths inherited without suspicion. A cage of soft pillows is still a cage. Nietzsche called this the tragedy of the last men, those who prefer anesthesia to consciousness, comfort to transcendence, safety to truth. People who do not awaken because awakening hurts. But when the soul decides to awaken, it does not ask for permission. It does not negotiate. It does not wait for a convenient hour. It rises like fire. Something begins to burn inside you, a question, a restlessness, a quiet dissatisfaction with the life you once defended. It begins subtly, a discomfort with the expectations of others, a sense that the world you inhabit is too small for the being you feel rising from within, a suspicion that meaning is not something you receive, but something you create. The day the soul awakens, you begin to see the cracks in everything that once seemed solid. Morality reveals itself as a historical costume, truth as an interpretation. Identity as a story you were taught to repeat. You begin to understand what Nietzsche meant when he said, "You must become who you are." Not who they told you to be, not who you pretend to be, not who you fear you might be, but the being hidden beneath all disguises. And yet, this awakening is terrifying, for to awaken is to witness the collapse of the world you once believed unshakable. You begin to lose things. Ideas. People. Certainties you once treated like sacred relics. Every awakening is a death. Every death is a beginning. Nietzsche believed that the highest moments in life are those where everything collapses except the truth of your own becoming. To awaken is not to gain something. It is to lose everything false. It is the day when your soul chooses expansion over obedience. The day when survival is no longer enough. The day when you finally understand that meaning is not discovered, it is forged. And nothing forged survives without passing through fire. That fire is coming. And in the ashes of what collapses, a new being prepares to rise. Awakening is not gentle. It does not arrive like a quiet revelation, but like a demolition disguised as enlightenment. When the soul decides to awaken, the first thing it destroys is the version of you that survived by sleeping. Most people are not afraid of truth. They are afraid of the consequences of truth. Because truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. And once you awaken, you can never return to the life that existed before the awakening. Nietzsche warned us, every rebirth demands first the death of the old. And this is the price your soul begins to pay in silence. You start noticing how much of your life was built on inherited fears, fears passed down like heirlooms, fears accepted as normal, fears disguised as virtues. You believed in humility because you were taught to shrink. You believed in obedience because you were taught to fear your own power. You called guilt goodness, when it was only the chain that kept you from becoming. Your awakening reveals the architecture of your prison, and the revelation hurts. It is painful to realize that you spent years protecting the very walls that suffocated you, that you defended ideas that betrayed you, that you obeyed rules that made you disappear. Nietzsche said that most people do not really want freedom, they want a comfortable version of captivity. But awakening destroys comfort. It does not ask if you are ready. Suddenly, everything you used to tolerate becomes unbearable. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. Relationships that once defined you now feel suffocating. Beliefs that once guided you now feel like chains around your throat. And there is no turning back. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot unfeel what you have felt. You cannot pretend to be asleep after tasting the rawness of consciousness. This is why awakening is so destructive. It dissolves the illusions that once held your world together. You lose your false peace so you can gain real clarity. You lose the comfort of belonging so you can finally belong to yourself. You lose the security of old truths so you can discover the danger of authenticity. For Nietzsche, this moment, the collapse of the old self, is sacred. He believed that destruction is not the opposite of creation, but its beginning. Like the forest that burns only to return stronger, or the star that collapses before it shines brightest. You are not falling apart. You are shedding. Your sorrow is not a failure, it is a symptom of transformation. Your confusion is not a curse, it is the first breath of freedom. And yet, as your old self crumbles, something in you trembles. Because awakening forces you to stand alone for the first time. Without the opinions that guided you. Without the roles that protected you. Without the old identity that gave you a name. You become a beautiful ruin, sacred in your collapse, magnificent in your vulnerability. This ruin is necessary. It is the clearing where the next version of your being will take its first step into existence. Nietzsche believed that the greatest human potential is only unlocked after the self has been cracked open. Because only through fracture can the light enter. And now, as the remnants of your old life fall around you, the question echoes in your soul. What will you build in the space that destruction has revealed? The answer will come, but only after you accept that nothing of the old world can survive in the new one. There comes a moment in every awakening when the collapse is no longer internal, it becomes visible. The world you once lived in begins to fall apart not because it has changed, but because you have. Nietzsche dizia que, o mundo é apenas reflexo de força ou fraqueza de sua alma. And when your soul begins to rise, everything built on weakness starts to crumble. This is the phase no one warns you about. Awakening feels powerful in theory, but in practice, it is an earthquake. Your relationships tremble first. You begin to notice the conversations driven by fear, the friendships sustained by convenience, the bonds upheld only by shared wounds. Your awakening becomes a mirror that others do not want to face. People preferred the version of you who stayed silent, who didn't challenge anything, who lived according to the script. Your awakening threatens their sleep. And suddenly, without meaning to, you start losing people. Not because you changed too much, but because they refused to change at all. Nietzsche sabia que a maioria das pessoas não odia a verdade, odia as consequências de verdade. And the consequence of your awakening is that you no longer fit into the world you outgrew. Work becomes strange. Routines become foreign. Your own voice becomes louder than the expectations of others. It feels as if the universe has shifted, but the shift happened inside you. You see deeper. You feel sharper. You perceive what you once ignored. And with each new layer of awareness, the world you once lived in becomes too small. Nietzsche wrote, "One must shed one's skin again and again." And as your old skin dissolves, your environment reacts. Some resist your growth. Others fear it. A few admire it, but from a distance. Because awakening is contagious, and people instinctively protect themselves from anything that threatens their comfortable illusions. So, what do? They call you lost because you stopped following the herd. They call you arrogant because you stopped shrinking. They call you strange because you outgrew what they still cling to. But what they are really saying is, you are becoming everything I'm afraid to be. This is the loneliness of awakening, the loneliness Nietzsche knew intimately. He walked alone not because he rejected the world, but because the world rejected the weight of his clarity. When you awaken, you stop depending on validation. And when you stop depending on it, People who benefited from your dependence disappear. This is the collapse. But it is a sacred collapse. Because everything that falls is something you no longer need. Your illusions fall. Your fears fall. Your false identities fall. Your borrowed beliefs fall. Your fragile attachments fall. And what remains is what was always real, the foundation of your true self. The collapse cleanses. Nietzsche believed that life only begins after one has lost everything false. That is why awakening feels like death, because it is. The death of who you were is the birth of who you are becoming. And yet, in the middle of the ruins, you feel something unexpected, a stillness, a clarity, a quiet strength that does not come from certainty, but from honesty. You begin to walk differently, not faster, not slower, but more deliberately. You realize that awakening is not an escape from life, it is a deeper descent into it. You begin to understand that the world collapsing around you is the world that was never truly yours. And the world you are about to build will not collapse, because it is grounded in truth. As Nietzsche said, you must become the architect of your own destiny. And every architect begins with demolition. This is the sacred destruction that prepares the foundation for the rest of your becoming. There is a moment in every awakening that Nietzsche knew better than anyone, a moment most people never reach, because they flee before they arrive. It is the moment when all the noise of the world falls silent, all the masks slide to the floor, all the identities collapse, and for the first time in your life, you stand face to face with the one person you have avoided the most, yourself. No roles. No expectations. No borrowed beliefs. No applause. No audience. Just you and the truth you have carried in your bones since the day you were born. Few moments in life are as terrifying. Because meeting your true self requires the courage Nietzsche described as the courage to be who you are, not who you should be. And that courage is rare. Most people spend their entire lives running from themselves, running into relationships, into work, into religion, into distractions, into addictions, into anything that keeps them from sitting alone with the weight of their own soul. They do not fear the world. They fear their own depth. Because depth demands honesty, and honesty dismantles everything. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not because the self is monstrous, but because it is immense. When you finally meet your true self, 3 revelations arrive, each one heavier than the last. You realize how much of your life wasn't lived, it was obeyed. You see how many desires were not yours. How many dreams were borrowed. How many choices were made out of fear, not freedom. You begin to see the invisible scripts society wrote for you long before you knew how to think. This realization hurts, but it is also liberation. Because now, for the first time, your life can actually begin. You realize that the person you pretended to be was loved, but you were not. People admired the mask. They accepted the version of you that was safe, polite, predictable. But the real you, the intense, raw, creative, contradictory, luminous you, remained hidden. Meeting your true self is mourning the relationships that existed only with your disguise. But it is also the moment that makes true relationships finally possible. You realize that your soul has been whispering to you for years, and you never listened. Every discomfort you silenced, every intuition you ignored, every moment you felt out of place, every time your heart asked for something more. It was always you calling yourself back. Awakening is nothing more than answering that call. And here comes the part Nietzsche understood most deeply. Meeting your true self is only frightening in the beginning. After that, it becomes the only place where peace exists. Because all suffering that comes from living a lie dissolves the moment you stop lying. All anxiety that comes from pretending evaporates the moment you stop pretending. All the exhaustion of performing a role fades when you step out of the stage. You were not born to act. You were born to be. Nietzsche wrote that, no one can build you the bridge on which you must cross the river of life. This bridge, this identity, this truth, this awakening, is your creation alone. And once you stand in front of your true self, something miraculous happens. You stop needing the world to understand you. Because you finally understand yourself. You stop needing approval. You stop needing permission. You stop needing reassurance. You stop needing validation. You become whole, not because the world accepts you but because you accept yourself. From this moment on, your life will never again fit into the small spaces that once contained you. Your voice becomes clearer. Your instincts sharpen. Your path opens. Your destiny breathes. This is the turning point of the awakening, when you stop running from the mirror and start walking with it. It is the moment Nietzsche called the birth of the free spirit. And once a free spirit is born, there is no force in the universe that can put it back to sleep. There comes a moment in every true awakening when something irreversible happens, something Nietzsche understood with an almost painful clarity. Your soul begins to outgrow the world. Not the physical world. Not existence itself. But the world of illusions, fears, expectations, and borrowed meanings that once felt so real. It is like waking up in a room that you didn't realize was too small until you finally stood upright. Suddenly, everything that once kept you comfortable starts to feel like a cage. Every shallow conversation becomes exhausting. Every false promise becomes unbearable. Every social mask becomes suffocating. Every empty routine becomes a quiet form of dying. Not because you are better than anyone, but because you can no longer pretend to be asleep. Nietzsche wrote that those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. Awakening allows you to hear a music the sleeping world does not recognize. This new music, the music of authenticity, courage, depth, begins to move you from within. You stop walking where everyone walks. You stop believing what everyone believes. You stop living in automatic mode. You stop hiding your truth to maintain harmony. You become impossible to predict, because you finally live from your center, not from society's expectations. You outgrow the fears that once ruled you. Fear of judgment, failure, rejection, loneliness, begin to lose their grip. Not because they disappear, but because they no longer define you. You feel them, but they no longer imprison you. This is the moment Nietzsche called the courage of the high spirit. Awakening does not make life easier, it makes you stronger. You outgrow lies. You no longer tolerate self-deception. You no longer swallow the narratives that once shaped your behavior. You no longer pretend to be fine when your soul is screaming. You no longer stay where your heart has already left. You no longer play roles that suffocate your essence. This honesty is painful, but it is also liberating. Nietzsche believed that the strength of a spirit is measured by how much truth it can endure. By this point in the awakening, your capacity for truth expands in ways you never imagined. You outgrow smallness, not material smallness, but existential smallness. You no longer shrink yourself to fit into spaces that no longer match your magnitude. You no longer dim your inner fire to avoid disturbing the darkness of others. You no longer make yourself lighter, quieter, safer just to be accepted. Awakening makes you too alive to remain in places where people go to die. You outgrow the need for approval. This is when you realize that approval was always a form of imprisonment. When your soul awakens, you stop needing applause because you stop performing. You stop needing permission because you stop apologizing for existing. You stop needing validation because you stop doubting yourself. You start trusting your intuition with a strength that feels ancient and strangely familiar. You outgrow the past no longer defines you. No longer dictates your fears, your reactions, your choices. You look at your old wounds not as prisons but as teachers. Pain becomes information. Failure becomes transformation. Loss becomes perspective. You begin to understand what Nietzsche meant when he said, "What does not kill me, makes me stronger." Not because pain is good, but because pain can be alchemized. This is the part of awakening that Nietzsche warned about, the moment when the world begins to crumble not because it is ending, but because you are beginning. Your inner architecture shifts. Your outer structures collapse. What once felt like your life now feels like a memory of who you used to be. You see the world with new eyes, eyes that were closed for too long. You sense the falseness in everything that once felt solid. You sense the truth in everything that once felt threatening. And this creates a silent earthquake. People may not understand you anymore. Some will drift away. Some will resist your change. Some will try to pull you back into the version of you that made them comfortable. But you cannot return. The door you walk through only opens in one direction. Nietzsche described this beautifully when he said that awakening is a rebirth of the spirit. Rebirth is not gentle. Rebirth is not quiet. Rebirth is not painless. Rebirth is rupture. Rebirth is fire. Rebirth is reconstruction. But rebirth is also freedom, the most radical, terrifying, luminous freedom a human being can experience. And you have arrived at its threshold. There is a moment in every awakening when something silent, invisible, and irreversible happens. You feel it before you understand it. You sense it before you can explain it. You experience it before you can accept it. It is the moment Nietzsche described when he said that the human being is not a fixed identity, but a bridge. A bridge between who you used to be and who you are destined to become. At this turning point, your old self no longer fits, like a skin you can no longer wear. But your new self is still emerging, still forming, still fragile. You stand in the middle of the bridge, between two worlds, between two versions of yourself, between two destinies. And this place, this precise place, is where everything inside you starts to tremble. The old self begins to die not violently, not suddenly, but inevitably. The old self dies every time you tell the truth instead of hiding. The old self dies every time you choose courage over convenience. The old self dies every time you say no to what no longer resonates. Every rejection of falseness is a funeral. Every small act of authenticity is a death sentence for who you once pretended to be. Nietzsche wrote that you must become who you are, but what he didn't say explicitly, yet implied in every page, is that becoming requires a burial. You cannot carry your old chains into your new freedom. The new self is still too small. Your new self is not ready yet. It is tender, almost embryonic. It flickers like a candle in a room still filled with wind. It needs stillness. It needs silence. It needs time. You feel it more than you see it, as intuition, as courage, as a strange new voice inside your chest. A voice that whispers, "There is more. Go forward. Do not shrink again." But this voice is not yet strong enough to drown out the noise of the old world. This is why awakening feels like confusion, like being torn in two, like wanting to run and wanting to hide at the same time. Awakening is ambidextrous. One hand reaches for the future, the other clings to the past. The bridge feels like a battlefield. This in-between state is not peaceful. It feels like inner war. Half of you wants to leap forward. Half of you wants to go back. Half of you is tired of the old world. Half of you is terrified of the new one. This is where Nietzsche's insight becomes brutally clear. Freedom is painful before it is liberating. Because freedom demands responsibility. Freedom demands authorship. Freedom demands that you choose, and choosing always requires sacrifice. The world you knew was built on the familiar. The world you're entering is built on the unknown, and the unknown terrifies the human mind. Loneliness becomes the new teacher at this turning point. Loneliness stops being a punishment and becomes a guide. You start to understand that solitude is not emptiness, it is presence. It is the silence where your next self begins to speak. Nietzsche spent much of his life alone not because he hated humanity, but because awakening isolates before it connects. The deeper you go into yourself, the fewer people can walk with you. This is not a tragedy, it is a purification. Those who cannot cross the bridge were never meant to walk your path. The world begins to resist your transformation. People sense your change even before you express it. Some will admire it. Some will fear it. Some will try to pull you back to the version of you that kept them comfortable. Because your awakening forces others to confront their own sleeping. Your authenticity threatens everyone still living behind masks. Your courage exposes everyone still living in fear. Your evolution reminds them of everything they abandoned. This is why Nietzsche insisted that the awakening individual will always walk a path marked by resistance. Transformation irritates those who refuse to transform. You realize there is no way back at some point. You discover something terrifying and beautiful. There is no going back. Not because back is impossible, but because back is too small. Your old life still exists, but not for you. Your old self is still possible, but no longer inhabitable. Once consciousness expands, it cannot shrink again. Once you see truth, you cannot unsee it. Once you awaken, sleep becomes a kind of death. This is the moment Nietzsche foresaw when he wrote that the secret of obtaining freedom is to assume responsibility for it. You may fear what lies ahead, but you cannot return to who you used to be. You stand at the threshold of a new existence. This threshold is the true turning point. You sense that something vast is coming. You don't know what it is, but you can feel its gravity. You are being pulled forward by a force older than fear, older than suffering, older than your story. It is the force of becoming, the evolutionary instinct of the soul. The inner fire Nietzsche saw in every human being who dared to wake up. This threshold is terrifying, but it is also sacred, because on the other side of it is the beginning of your true life. And that life is calling you. There comes a moment in every awakening when the world stops collapsing and begins to expand. A moment when you realize that the breaking was not destruction, it was preparation. That the silence was not emptiness, it was gestation. That the darkness was not punishment, it was initiation. This is the moment Nietzsche foresaw when he wrote that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. You have crossed the chaos. You have carried the fire. And now comes the birth of the self, the birth of clarity, the birth of your true life. The first breath of the new self, the rebirth, does not arrive with thunder. It begins with a breath. A subtle feeling that the weight you carried for years has finally loosened. A sense that something inside you has begun to rise, quietly, steadily, inevitably. You wake up one morning and realize that the fear is lighter. The doubt is softer. The pain is no longer a prison, but a memory. You have changed. Not dramatically, but fundamentally. Like dawn, the light doesn't shout. It simply appears, and nothing is ever the same again. The return of inner authority for the first time in your life, you begin to trust your own voice. Not the voice of your past. Not the voice of society. Not the voice of expectations. But the voice that comes from the deepest chamber of your being. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for validation. You stop shrinking to fit the lives of others. You become your own witness, your own judge, your own compass. Nietzsche believed that the greatest form of strength is the ability to obey one's own inner law. In this rebirth, your authority returns. You reclaim the throne of your consciousness. And for the first time, you sit in it without apology. The body remembers the light. Your body begins to change before your mind notices. Your breath deepens. Your posture rises. Your heartbeat becomes calmer, less defensive. You no longer live in constant anticipation of threat. Your system relaxes because it finally trusts the one controlling it, you. You start to feel as if 1,000 invisible chains have fallen from your limbs. And you move through the world not like someone escaping, but like someone arriving. Arriving in yourself. Arriving in your life. Arriving in your truth. This is rebirth made flesh. The mind becomes a clear sky. Thoughts no longer chase you like predators. You no longer drown in your own interpretations. Your mind becomes spacious, wide, open. A sky after the storm. You begin to see patterns where before there was only noise. You see meaning where before there was only chaos. And you realize something profound. The world didn't become easier, your perception became wiser. This clarity is not forced. It is not intellectual. It is not the product of effort. It is the natural fragrance of a mind that has finally stopped lying to itself. You become the creator of meaning. This is the greatest moment in Nietzsche's entire philosophy. The moment when the human being stops seeking meaning and begins creating it. You no longer beg the universe for direction. You no longer wait for purpose to descend from the heavens. You use your life as a canvas. Your choices as brushstrokes. Your courage as color. You begin to sculpt existence with the same force that once sculpted your suffering. This is the moment when you understand what Nietzsche tried to tell the world. You are not a seeker of purpose, you are its author. Love returns in a new form, not the fragile love of dependency. Not the wounded love that begs. Not the fearful love that clings. A new love emerges, one born from overflow, not from emptiness. You love because you are full, not because you are missing. You love because your presence is no longer a burden, but a gift. You begin to see beauty in details you once ignored, a passing face, a silent room, a fleeting moment of sunlight. This love is not romantic. It is existential. It is the love of being. The love of becoming. The love of life itself. This is amor fati in its purest form. The heart saying yes to everything. You discover that you are the miracle at the end of the metamorphosis. You stumble upon a truth that Nietzsche hinted at but could never fully say. The miracle you were searching for was always you. Not the old you. Not the frightened you. Not the disguised you. But the becoming you. The awakened you. The reborn you. The you who understands that divinity is not out there. It is in the force with which you carry your existence. The fire you survived did not burn you. It forged you. And now, standing in the center of your new life, you realize, you are no longer the seeker. You are the source. You are no longer the question. You are the answer. You are no longer the echo. You are the voice. This is the ultimate rebirth. The liberation Nietzsche foresaw. The climax of the awakening journey. Not salvation. But sovereignty. Not escape. But embodiment. Not a new heaven, but a new self. And from this new self, a new world begins.